and banks do need regulation.
Do we need one regulator, one big regulator that will?
Well, if it was me, I would like it. I mean, because you need somebody that doesn't have a big stick.
Yeah.
I mean, left to their own devices, people will take on too much leverage. They may not this year or next year or anything, but financial institutions, particularly if they're promising they're going to increase their earnings per share every quarter, and they'll do off-balance sheet things and all of these sins that were committed a few years ago. You know, Freddie and Fannie did a lot of them too, and they were regulated by Congress.
And it had 200 regulators marching in the office every day.
So we've had Congress regulate the two of the 5 or 6 most important financial institutions in the United States, and it was a total flop. So it's tough being a regulator, but you want somebody that is independent, somebody that's got real muscle, and hopefully somebody that has an understanding of what you need to do to keep the system working well too.
And that's the Federal Reserve.
I think they're good at it. They weren't perfect this time around, but Congress wasn't perfect either.
But once the problem came, they responded, and you have untold admiration for Bernanke.
If he hadn't have had the authority he had, and maybe if he even hadn't thought he had a little more authority than he even did have last fall. I mean, there's something to that.
Yes.
I mean, you had to have somebody that would step up, guarantee money market funds, keep commercial paper flowing, do these things that not many people could have done, and certainly Congress couldn't have done them with the speed. And speed was absolutely essential. I mean, you did not have a lot of time to save this patient.
And they understood that.
They really understood it.
And reacted. And gained a lot of power and used it. There's also this. You cannot establish a particular leverage ratio, can you? You can't say that 15 to 1 is as far as it should ever be.
No, if you have a bank that owns nothing but short-term government bonds, they can have 50 to 1, and you got them, they've got a whole bunch of money lent out to other guys who are leveraged in various ways and various speculative things. 5 to 1 is too much. So pure numbers don't work.
So what works?
That's the problem. That is the problem.
That's why.
No, I mean, if you could stick a bunch of ratios out there, it'd be all over.
But what works? I mean, it's the problem. Give me a possible way of dealing with the problem.
I would like to have a very smart, strong regulator that understood the nuances of different kinds of leverage and what it might mean. And one who would be willing not only to use those rules at individual institutions, but who would speak out to the country. Can't speak out too often and have it meaningful, but who would speak out to the country about a generalized problem, because that's what we needed. It wasn't the fact that it was Bank A or Bank B or Bank C. What was happening was that you were having a bubble that everybody was joining in and speaking out on that, which requires a lot of guts and may even get ignored, although if it comes from somebody that is running the Fed, or whomever, or the President of the United States. I mean, there can be people that will have an impact on that.
You've said that you're not in favor of too much coddling and that you'd like to see the stick used more.
Absolutely.
Tell us what you mean.
Well, what I mean is that if you run a financial institution, and it's financial institutions overwhelmingly that do tend to create the problems because there's this aggregation of capital. And if you run a financial institution that, in effect, can bring down the system unless the federal government steps in. Right. If you get to that point, I think something very bad should happen to you. I don't think you should walk away with a lot of money or even with 10% of your previous net worth or anything of the sort. And I think the directors who selected you and let you operate in that manner should have some real downside. I'm not for shooting them, but I'm for making.
But the threat of would be.
I think I want to make it painful for them. I mean, if they're going to
painful would be they can't buy insurance.
No, I would probably have, in terms of the very large financial institutions, that if they had to go to the government. And the government had to act, because there are going to always be too big to fail institutions. It drives regulators crazy, but that's the reality of it. And if an institution comes in and says, if we go down, we're pulling the whole country down with us, I think that the directors and the CEO of an institution like that, I think the directors say, you certainly have to give back, they should 5 times the highest fee they've received in the previous year. Because you're sitting around those places now getting $200,000 to $300,000 a year, And all I want for my $200,000 to $300,000 a year is somebody that is selecting and designing a compensation system for the person they put in charge, the CEO, who should be the chief risk officer. I want them to have a system that penalizes that person very, very significantly. And if they don't create that kind of, if they pick the wrong person or they let that person go off the reservation, I want them to pay also.
All right. So let me just, you want there to be a penalty for directors who do not do their job.
Yeah,
but you recognize that there are going to be financial institutions that are too big to fail. It has been and will continue to be. You can't simply say we're going to let anybody fail, no matter how big, no matter what the consequences.
No, we're not just going to have a mom and pop bank on every corner, and it isn't going to work.
Do you think that the financial community has any sense of I'm sorry?
Well, most of them didn't do it. I mean, in the sense that if you take the leaders of these institutions that got them in, a lot of them are gone. Now, they're gone with more money than I would like to have them gone with. And I think what's infuriating to the American public, if you take the people in Omaha,
exactly.
they have seen lots of unemployment. They've seen, many cases their homes or their friends' homes foreclosed. They've seen all these things happen to them. And nobody's gone to jail, and as far as they're concerned, the leaders of institution A, B, or C that have, in a big way, contributed to these problems, they may be worth $10 million instead of $100 million or something like that. But they don't see anybody going to jail. They don't see anybody being held very responsible for it.
And they don't believe that if they were in the same place, a much lower investment, that anybody would have come along and taken care of them.
Well, yeah, and they're right about that. I mean, if I have a tiny little business that fails, it doesn't affect the United States. But if you have Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae
or AIG or
Citicorp, they would have affected. I mean, we could not stand those dominoes falling, and it drives people crazy that we couldn't, but we couldn't. I mean, if a few more dominoes had fallen, if that weekend of September 12th, the 14th, or whatever it was, if one more domino, then Merrill Lynch going, Morgan Stanley would have been next. The dominoes were so lined up and they were so big that
without the government, they would have gone down.
They would have gone down. But bear this in mind. They talk about moral hazard on this. There's no moral hazard. If you look at Citi, 90% of the market value has disappeared. If you look at Freddie Mac, 90% of the market value of the common, more than that's disappeared.
Look at AIG.
Fannie Mae, AIG, all of them. So the stockholders have gotten totally creamed. The owners have gotten totally creamed. So it's not like anybody that was a stockholder of Citi or Freddie or Fannie or AIG or you name it is thinking, the system's going to save me, because it didn't save them. They got killed. But the guys at the top did not get, in most cases, did not get killed, and they're the ones that made the mistake.
And should they have gotten killed, so to speak?
It should have been harder.
So how would the government have done that?
I would probably have something with those kind of institutions where no one got rich from running an institution like that until about 5 years after they left. I mean, I'd have had it very restricted, and I'd have clawbacks, and I'd be plenty tough, and I'd be tough on the directors if they hadn't put in those kind of arrangements.
Now, they say that now. If you listen to these financial executives today, they say, we're in favor of clawbacks, and we've instituted those kinds of things. I don't know whether they have.
Well, they've done some, but I'd probably square it.
You make it exponentially better.
And I wouldn't let them buy against this sort of risk. I wouldn't let them buy directors' officers insurance, liability insurance.
Right.
We don't have that at Berkshire. I mean, if our shareholders are going to go down, I want me to go down with them, and the directors to go down with them. I mean, we've taken on the job, and if the ship goes down, we should not get the first lifeboat.
When you look at that year, this is a book by Andrew Sorkin.
It's a very good book.
And you're in there. Moments for you. I mean, you were at the other end of phone calls from people who
wanted money.
Who wanted money. And in some cases, advice. But mostly money.
Mostly, money. They take money before. There's a choice between money and advice, right?
They'll take money. So they mostly wanted money. Are there moments you look back in which you said no, that you might have said yes? I mean, do you have any sense of...
You just call you.
I know you do.
I mean, it's just like standing there at the plate. That pitch comes there. You got a half a second to decide whether to swing. And,
I know you're not a man to agonize, but I mean,
I could have done way smarter things. I did not optimize the period. Looking back,
because you had money and they needed money, and they would have given up a lot for that money.
Yeah. Plus, the bottom of the market was 6 months later. I mean, and it was significantly lower. So if I just save the money, just put it in the market 6 months later, I'd have done way better than making these deals.
Right.
But I didn't know that at the
time. So you said, I'm optimistic, but I'm not sure my optimism is justified.
Well, I don't try and pick